In ancient Indian political thought, one of the worst circumstances in which a state can find itself in was that of anarchy. In the words of historian John Spellman, in ancient India, the fear of anarchy was almost pathological. This fear of anarchy and the concept of anarchy itself manifested in ancient Indian political thought in the doctrine of Matsyanyaya. In this video, we will talk about this concept of Matsyanyaya and see how ancient Indian political thinkers tackled it. If we start with the term itself, Matsanyaya, it literally means law of the fish, and it refers to the natural state where the bigger fish eat the smaller ones. In ancient works that are concerned with political philosophy, we find that one of the central themes of these works is this concept of Matsanyaya. If we look at the epics like Mahabharata or Dharmashastras, we find that this concept of Matsanyaya holds a crucial place. And it would not be wrong for us to say that we cannot understand the idea of kingship in ancient India without first clearly understanding this concept of Matsanyaya. Although when we talk about this concept, most of us associate it with Kautilya's Arthashastra. And it is true that in Kautilya's Arthashastra, he talks about this concept, but he did not invent it. The earliest traces of this concept appears in later Vedic text, particularly Shatapatha Brahmana. In the book 11, it is mentioned, whenever there is drought, then the stronger seizes the weaker, for the waters are the law. In this quote, we can see that the idea of anarchy is apparent when the natural order through which men are governed breaks. Now, this idea of anarchy gradually evolves. By the time we move to Mahabharata, in this text, we find that the idea of anarchy has matured. And one of the ways through which this idea of anarchy is visualized is through the metaphor of strong fish eating weak ones. But in Mahabharata, we find that the idea of anarchy is not expressed through the term Matsanyaya. Instead, the term Arajaka has been used. In Mahabharata, not only this term Arajaka is mentioned, but we see that there is an exhaustive description of what are the different characteristics of this Arajaka. And we can classify these descriptions into 6 different ways. First, the strong will claim everything, the result being that the weak will suffer. Second, the weak are enslaved. Third, the women are snatched away and violated, which would result in the collapse of this institution of marriage. Fourth, the idea of private property or of ownership does not exist. Fifth, since there is no private property or ownership, social ties cease to exist. Sixth, because of all these, individual efforts or socio-economic activity cease to exist. If those who produce, whether through agriculture or craftsmanship, know that what they are producing will not remain with them and they would not get compensated for it, then they would naturally stop producing it. Thus, every socio-economic activity will come to a stop. Through this description, we can clearly see that, according to Mahabharata, a world without a king is a frightening one. And we can also see that Matsanyaya operates in the absence of king. So, the term Arajaka and Matsanyaya are both related. How prominent this need of a king is in Mahabharata is reflected in Shanti Parva, where Bhishma recommends that one of the first duty of a kingdom is to coronate a king. Mahabharata makes it amply clear that it is the king who safeguards the kingdom from anarchy or Matsanyaya. Now, at one point, Bhishma also says that one should not reside in a country that does not have a king. Now, since we have already established that in ancient Indian political thought, it is the king who protects his subject and his country from Matsanyaya, the next question that naturally arises from this is, how does exactly the king performs this duty? The answer is through danda. The word danda can mean rod or punishment. And in ancient texts, it is used in both ways. For example, in Shanti Parv, Bhishma tells Yudhishthir that the dand or the royal rod was created by the god Brahma for the protection of the world. And it is through the correct administration of dand that the people would perform their proper duties. It is this concept of dand that is central to how ancient Indian political thinkers thought about the origin of kingship. Without dand, there is no order. Everything depends on it. It is dand that keeps Matsyanyaya at bay. It is dand that inspires fear in people. In ancient texts, it is clear that it is the pejorative of the king to use dand. But ancient texts also make it clear that the king cannot use dand arbitrarily. If the king applies dand harshly, then he will not only alienate his subjects, but the ascetics who reside in forests will also move away from him. Or in other words, we can say that the application of severe dand by the king leads to the destruction of the king himself. On the other hand, if the dand is mild, then the subjects would overpower the king, and again this pernicious state of Matsyanyaya would prevail. That is why, according to ancient Indian political thinkers, dand should be applied in accordance with Lokashastra or worldly science. If the king applies dand properly, it will lead to good fortune. If you look at Arthashastra, one of the two instances where the term Mātsyanyāya has been used by Kautilya, it appears in relation with dand. Kautilya in the book first writes, and I quote, "If not used at all, dand gives rise to the Mātsyanyāya. For the stronger swallows the weak in the absence of the wielder of dand." Here in this quote, you can see that Kautilya calls the king wielder of dand, and he follows the statement of Mahabharata where it is mentioned that without king, Mātsyanyāya prevails. In the second instance, the term Mātsyanyāya appears in Arthashastra when Kautilya recommends that set of 2 spies should be sent in order to propagate why the institution of monarchy is necessary for the state. In this setup, Kautilya recommends that these 2 spies should oppose one another in a discussion. This discussion should happen in a place where there is crowd, like holy places, assemblies, or gatherings. First, one spy would say about the king that this king is said to be endowed with all virtues, and yet no virtue is to be seen in him, as he oppresses citizens and country people with fines and taxes. Kautilya tells us that after this first spy has complained about the king, then it is the job of the second spy to contradict him. First, by telling the story of how kingship originated. This is what, according to Kautilya, the second spy would say. People, overwhelmed by Mātsyanyāya, made Manu, the son of Vavasvat, their king. And they assigned 1/6 of the grains, 1/10 of the commodities and money as his share. Maintained by that, kings bring about the well-being and security of the subjects. Those who do not pay fines and taxes take on themselves the sins of those kings. And kings who do not bring about well-being and security take on themselves the sins of the subjects. After establishing how important the king is for a state, Kautilya recommends that the second spy should say, "The wrath and favor of the king is visibly manifests, just like the wrath and favor of Indra and Yama. Even divine punishment strikes those who slight them. Therefore, king must not be slighted." Through this whole scheme, Kautilya wants to propagate in masses how important the role of a king is for a state. Now, if you have been paying attention, you will notice that all of my examples of Mātsyanyāya are from literary texts. This preponderance of literary evidence can lead someone to argue that this was just a theoretical topic that was restricted to political treaties. It had nothing to do with the day-to-day politics of the past. This allegation would have been true if not for an inscription. This inscription belongs to Dharmapal, the Pal ruler of Bengal. In this inscription, Dharmapal tells us that his predecessor Gopal was chosen by the people to put an end to Matsyanyaya, which basically means that Gopal became a king in order to prevent anarchy. So this use of Matsanyaya with kingship suggests that this was not just a political concept that had no use in reality. It was very much part of the political milieu of ancient Indian past. Now, since we are talking about kingship, another question that arises is whether there existed private property in ancient India. You can watch this video to know about how ancient Indian political thinkers thought about ownership of land. If you like this channel, do subscribe. Thank you for watching.